After weeks in a Karnes County Immigration Detention Center, an Austin high school senior is back at school just in time for graduation. This week on Inside the Investigation, investigative reporter Kelly Wiley explains the community effort led by a U.S. Congressman to secure Luis Fernando Cabrera's release and what his arrest tells us about how Texas is assisting federal immigration officials. Hello and welcome to another edition of Inside the Investigation. I'm KXAN Director of Investigations and Innovation, Josh Hinkle. I'm playing host today because our regular host, Kelly Wiley, investigative reporter on our team, is actually the one telling this story today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks for being with me this week. So I want to dive right in. You've been following this case of Luis Fernando for about 2 weeks now. Catch us up. What has been happening?
A lot has been happening. I mean, this started May 1st, and it's been a whirlwind story to keep up with since then. I'll start by telling you a little bit about Luis Fernando Cabrera. He's 18. He's a student at Northeast Early College High School. That's in Austin ISD campus. He plays on the varsity soccer team as a goalie. He's got a little baby nephew and a sister that he lives with full time. While finishing his senior year, he's been working overnight at a fast food restaurant, Popeyes, to help support his sister financially. His family is originally from Honduras, but he was actually born in Mexico. The family moved there, and then from Mexico, from what we understand, they immigrated to the United States and began the asylum claim process. At the time that they came here in 2019, he was 11 years old.
So how did he end up in ICE detention?
So from talking to his sister, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and to ICE, we understand that on May 1st, he was leaving his shift, a late night shift at Popeyes. It was 2 a.m. And let's just let that sink in, being a high school student and working those kind of hours. When a DPS trooper pulled him over on I-35, he was coming back home. And that trooper determined, according to DPS, that Luis was not in the U.S. lawfully, and then contacted ICE. Since then, Luis Fernando has been at Karnes County Immigration Processing Center, where it's worth noting there's an Austin ISD teacher there as well. So pretty much immediately after his detention, we started to hear from his family and his community. They shared the circumstances surrounding his detention, and we started to ask more questions to authorities. Both DPS and ICE confirmed to us that they were involved. And notably, DPS told us that the trooper that pulled over Luis Fernando had a very specific training that's becoming more and more prevalent across the United States, but particularly in Texas. The trooper is a federally certified delegated immigration officer under 287G.
So let's stop there for people that may not be familiar with 287G. This is actually something we've been covering for more than a year now, as the new Trump administration has been trying to ramp up in immigration enforcement efforts. 287G is a way that local and state law enforcement agencies can sign an agreement with ICE to basically have their officers deputized. There are several different models. Some of them are in the jail, related to warrants specifically, but something like this is what's called the task force model. And that's where essentially a local or a state officer who is deputized as an ICE officer through this agreement can make those immigration-related arrests or searches, anything related to immigration out in the field in the normal course of the duties of their regular job.
Right.
And so that's what we've seen in this case as well.
Yes, it's something that we're starting to ask more and more as we start to dive in on these individual cases. We're wanting to know from our team, was this a trooper who's a part of who's trained as a 287G delegated immigration officer? And so that was something that we asked in this case, and it was something to take note of for our team, that this was a trooper who was acting under that authority.
And with 287G specifically, it's fast growing. Texas has just become the largest state in the nation to have the most 287G. I think it's just under 400 at this point. It was second for a long time, just behind Florida. But what we've seen is that Texas law enforcement agencies are increasingly signing these agreements with the federal government, largely because state leaders passed a law last year during the legislative session that actually requires sheriff's offices to sign agreements under this type of thing by the end of this year. So we're seeing a lot of sheriff's offices, but it's not just sheriff's offices. Obviously, DPS, as you mentioned, is one of the state agencies that's in it. There are a lot of like local municipalities where police departments are doing this too. So I think we're going to continue seeing this operation, these types of immigration enforcement actions grow.
Absolutely.
Well, so we also learned the biggest update this week was that Luis Fernando is being released from ICE detention, right?
Yes, and we got a video this week showing them reuniting. We heard from Luis's family that he was released Wednesday late afternoon around 5 o'clock, and they sent us this video where his sister and his 2-year-old nephew, they're all hugging and embracing. But I want to back up and tell you how we got to that place. So Luis has been in ICE detention or immigration detention in Karnes County since early May. And during that time, there's been a big movement by attorneys in our area, his classmates, his teachers, his community, but also it's been led by U.S. Congressman Greg Casar. We saw Congressman Casar standing in front of his school, holding a press conference, standing next to his graduation robe, because this whole thing has happened kind of under this ticking clock. Luis was supposed to graduate alongside is supposed to graduate alongside his classmates on June 2nd. He was detained May 1. So imagine that, like you're kind of getting ready to graduate finally from high school, and then this happens. And so this whole conversation that's been happening in the community has been around, can we get him out in time for graduation? And it's been their hope, but there's been concern that it may not be that outcome. So we saw Congressman Casar saying, he should be at graduation. He doesn't have a criminal record. This is somebody who is working and supporting his family, and it's not a flight risk. We saw his attorney step out and say very similar things and sort of paint this picture of Luis's character. We saw the attorney, when we went to this first press conference, passed out all of these letters of support that people in Luis's life had submitted for it to go to a judge. One of the letters was from his former English teacher. Another was from the principal of Northeast Early College High School, who said Luis has great character. His English teacher, we spoke to him, it's his former English teacher, his junior year he had him, said Luis is the kind of kid who, if he had a bunch of friends that were maybe roughhousing or not being the best students, that Luis would come up to his teacher afterwards and say, "I'm sorry," for the rest of the group, which is not something you typically hear about a teenage boy anywhere, that they would have that kind of wherewithal maybe to be the person to say, "Sorry about that." And so they're kind of painting this picture of who this kid is. And so we found out from the attorney that they very quickly, I think a week after he was detained, filed what's called a habeas corpus petition. And this is essentially asking a judge for an immediate release of someone who is detained. And their argument again was that this kid is not a flight risk. He's going to school, he's working a job, his family's here, and he has an ongoing asylum case. He's had an asylum case since 2020, from what we can tell in court records. And his attorney makes the point that he's showing up to things as they happen. He's checking in, his whole family is checking in. And so they were telling us that they were waiting on the judge to hold the hearing. And then this week, this has happened very quickly. This week, we saw that the judge, a U.S. District Court judge, filed a court order essentially saying, I agree, this kid, Luis, has no criminal history, is not a flight risk or a danger to the community from the judge's assessment, and has complied in the past with the conditions of him being in the U.S. seeking asylum. So we saw that filed by the U.S. District Court judge on Wednesday, and then later that day, Luis was out. And part of the court order was that ICE had to release him before Friday. So this happened very, very quickly. And now it's looking like, for all intents and purposes, he'll be able to make graduation on June 2nd. So for this family, it's been a very happy reunion.
I know you mentioned Congressman Greg Casar was one of the leaders who's really been pushing this case and kind of where the outcome is now. He's a Democrat. This has become a very politicized issue, not just with Luis's case, but 287G, immigration enforcement in general. We've heard from Democrats on this specific case. What are the Republicans who you've reached out to saying?
Well, we reached out to several Republicans, particularly from Texas. We reached out to Congressman Chip Roy, to Senator John Cornyn, and others, and we've really not gotten a response at all. We've tried to do interviews. Now, Congressman Chip Roy was in town yesterday, and he didn't comment specifically on Luis's case, but he did talk more broadly about how he believes district attorneys in the state, how law enforcement officers should be working with immigration officials. And he talked about other cases where young people who are Luis's age, who are undocumented and in the country, do go on to commit acts of violence. And so part of his messaging is that we should, or not we, but district attorneys, law enforcement officers should be working in concert with immigration officials to really crack down on people who are in the country undocumented. And then more than that, we did talk to ICE, and ICE didn't tell us much other than kind of the facts of the case, that Luis came into the country as a family unit, that they came in 2019. They also said that when Luis was detained, that he freely admitted that he had no legal basis to be in the country. And they added in a couple other lines that we've seen them repeat with other situations where there's been someone undocumented that they've detained, and perhaps similar circumstances where they're seeking asylum. And we heard them say that detention is a choice. That was the quote that they gave us, and that they're encouraging people to self-deport and to come back into the country in the correct way. The right way was the exact language that they've used. So in this message, they didn't assert that Luis had broken any law other than coming into the country, in their words, unlawfully. But they did say that there's kind of reaffirm that there is a correct way that they want people to go about coming into the country. So that's some of the narrative that we've heard from conservative voices in general on this matter, but then also reiterated from ICE.
So with Luis's case specifically, I know you mentioned, he's going to continue the asylum process. What happens at this point? I mean, is there still anything that can happen as far as detention? Could he be arrested again on anything? Will he be allowed to continue that asylum process?
So part of the court order is that they cannot detain him again unless circumstances change significantly, right? Like unless he commits a crime, or again, part of the reason why he was released was because the judge felt he wasn't a flight risk. The judge talked about no criminal history. So if any of those factors were to change, I think we'd be having a different conversation. His asylum case will continue on. And even when Luis was first detained, we've seen this play out in a lot of different ways. I don't know if folks are familiar with the couple that was arrested right outside Adobe. And what we saw in that case was that couple and their children, including 2 US-born children, were immediately deported pretty much. It happened within a week that they were detained and then out of the country. And we've seen that happen in other cases. But then we've also seen cases where perhaps somebody does have some sort of active asylum case going, and they would maybe go to Carnes, and the line from ICE would be that they're going to finish their immigration proceedings from there. So there is a distinction to make. So now that Luis has been released, our understanding is that his asylum case will continue on. Now, we don't really have much understanding of how long that process could go on, but the idea is he's been released, and he'll finish out that process. So that's our understanding of it. And we'll be keeping our eyes on it. We're in touch with his attorneys, we're in touch with his family, and we've got a good communication line with immigration officials to continue to learn more about this situation.
Yeah, and you've been covering this topic, not just with Luis's case, but we've been seeing it with other students, teachers, and then just broadly the community. And our team continues to cover this from all aspects. So we really appreciate you keeping us updated on this very detailed subject and breaking it down for our audience. But thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus Smart TV app every Friday. You can also listen to an audio version on KXAN's Investigative Podcast with new episodes every Saturday morning wherever you get podcasts.